Look, guys, the NFL wildcard weekend, it came and it went. Now we have to wait a couple days to be able to watch the NFL playoffs again. But let's jump straight into this. We're going to be talking about NFL playoff losers. Obviously, there's 12 teams in the first round. There's 6 games. 6 teams have to lose. And as you can see, we're going to be starting with the Broncos. And if I'm being honest, I think they probably have the brightest future of all the playoff losers. Or even of, you could say all the playoff teams, but obviously, the Bills have Josh Allen. And there's, obviously all the elite quarterbacks with those good teams. Obviously, they have bright futures already. But the Broncos, out of all the losing teams, they're the second youngest playoff team, and the Packers being the first. But Bo Nix has truly looked good. Apparently, he had a back injury since week 12. And people sit here and say, well, maybe it's just because he lost. They're coming out here and saying it. But maybe he's really just embracing his inner Drew Brees. Brees played his last 5 years always banged up and hurt. But I will say, even with the bright future, I think the receivers are still an area of concern. Sutton will make the craziest catch, even like that one right there. Then he's had some pretty bad drops, honestly, where he's just kind of open. Bo Nix puts it on the money and he finds a way to drop it. Troy Franklin, too, has been having some issues with drops, and even all of our receivers, if I'm being honest. Now, I think that this offense needs a true offensive threat, but I don't really know if that comes from the wide receiver position. If I'm the Broncos, I think you have to go with an offensive player in the first 2 rounds, as long as you're not forcing it. I think that this running back class might be deep enough so you can get a running back in the second round. Maybe you even trade up a little bit in the second round, maybe giving up like a fourth rounder or something. But I think that you go tight end in the first round as long as Loveland or Warren are there. And I think the secondary is going to need some improvement. Now, the Broncos have a lot of cap space this offseason with more of Russell Wilson's contract being off the books. So I'd really especially look out for them to go out here and sign maybe a slightly bigger name player. I don't know if they'll necessarily trade for Garrett Wilson. And like I said, I don't think you draft receiver in the first 2 rounds. But, they have the cap space. The O-line is fine. I think that maybe they can go out there and try to improve the secondary this offseason. Obviously, it'll depend who are the available free agents. And maybe at the tight end position, you even go with Foster Moreau from the Raiders. With them having Brock Bowers now, unless they really want to keep both of them, try to just make sure that you still have those 2 tight ends there. But, like I said, second youngest team in the playoffs. And if I'm being honest, Bo Nix, I think there's the chance that he's a top 7 quarterback throughout most of his career. And top 7's a little weird, but I think he will be in the top 10 of quarterbacks through the rest of his career. And that's not even glaze or anything. You go out there and, you watch him. He knows how to run an offense. Really, he just needs to figure out the footwork part. He can really scramble, move out the pocket. If I'm a Broncos fan, and I am, it's super exciting for the future. So obviously that shows, I'm a little biased. But at the same time, this isn't just a bias. Like, this isn't, oh, he has all this potential. He has been showing it so far. It's not like when I used to be obsessed with Drew Lock and I thought he was the next coming of Peyton Manning or anything. But we'll go ahead and move on to the Steelers next. Look, guys, with the Steelers, I'm honestly not too optimistic about them. I believe they have okay cap space. And just going forward, though, they are a little bit of an older team. They were the third oldest team in the playoffs. And that's, obviously Cam Hayward's still playing for them. He's probably retiring within next year, maybe year after. This team's aging, and Russell Wilson showed he's not the answer. The Steelers have just lost 4 straight, and they've all been against good teams. And I wouldn't blame them for signing Russell Wilson to maybe a smaller contract for next season, maybe the year after. But I don't really know if Justin Fields will be your answer either. And if you were to re-sign both of them, one great coach said, I know I'm blanking on the name, but if you have 2 quarterbacks, you really don't even have one. And that's just something the Steelers need to keep in mind, and they need to go out there and try to acquire a bit of a better quarterback. Now, if we're going to talk about not being able to beat good teams, maybe Sam Darnold isn't your answer, but I think Sam Darnold's still solid. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers were to try to go out there and sign him. I think that you have to consider the fact that this team needs a roster shakeup. And when it comes to Mike Tomlin, I don't think he's done, right? I don't think it would make sense to go ahead and fire him or anything. But this team needs a shakeup all down the lineup, and I think it's showed that by playoff loss after playoff loss after playoff loss. And I think at some point you have to realize that this core of players just isn't working. And I think at some point, if Pickens has enough trade value, how much does a good or great receiver really make you into a contender? I mean, we've seen the Chiefs, and yes, it's the Chiefs. They have Mahomes. There's not another Mahomes or Andy Reid. But how much does a great, good wide receiver really make you into a contender? I think if you can get the right package for Pickens, that honestly you consider trading him and taking what you can get. And yes, Pickens is still there next year, so I think you really do consider trading him in the offseason, seeing if you can get some capital for him. Because I think he's a little bit overrated, if we're being honest here. You have to try to go get an elite receiver as your receiver one. You can't sit here with a couple mediocre guys and say, all right, maybe four wide receiver threes. That's not including Pickens, obviously. Maybe that makes a wide receiver two, and that's just not how the NFL works or building a roster works. But I think in the offseason, you have to look at moving on from your old guys. You have to consider the fact that a roster shakeup just might be needed for this team to get back to being a top contender. Look, guys, not the Herberts, but the Chargers got absolutely destroyed. And if we're being honest, the meltdown by Justin Herbert in this game was pretty concerning. He kind of just threw a lot of bad balls and just tried to force too much, like that one right there. Now, the O-line did have lots of miscommunications, if we're being honest. They crumbled a bit. That's to be expected from a slightly younger line. They might have to go out there and try to build the interior just slightly better. Obviously, Joe Alt has been very good this season, not just for a rookie, but for all tackles in the league. And the Chargers' defense throughout this game was very lackluster, though. They kind of just let the Texans do whatever on them. When it came to running the ball, they let the Texans just go straight to the outside, go through the middle, just anything. The run defense was not there, and Joe Mixon's a good back. The Texans have a solid line. But at the same time, you just can't have that no matter what, no matter how good of the team you're facing. And it's not even like this Texans run game is crazy elite or anything, or the offensive line is super elite or anything. It is good, it is solid, but, they weren't going against the best of the best running teams in the league. Now, I think you have to improve the receiver room, and maybe that's why Herbert got caught forcing balls a bit, was just the fact that maybe he doesn't have much trust in his receivers. But if you don't have trust in your receivers, it feels like normally quarterbacks will hang on to the ball for a bit. This receiver room, no matter what, needs improvement. Quentin Johnston, he looked good at times this year. He definitely made an improvement from his rookie year. But if we're looking at it, I think you have to consider the fact that he might not be it. Ladd McConkey, bit of a snub from the Pro Bowl. He was right there. But no matter what, this receiver room wasn't quite it outside of McConkey. Now, you might even have to consider bringing in a tight end. But Will Dissly is a solid tight end. Now, I think the running back room is actually fine. I do really like J.K. Dobbins. I think they should try to extend him. But this receiver room, once again, just not it. But I will say this team's future is still bright no matter what. Even with this bad loss, look, a lot of people thought they were not a playoff team at all. So the fact that they got there, that's impressive. And right there kind of shows some of the issues with their receiving room. Sorry to break my train of thought there. But this team, they have a bright future. Rashawn Slater's a solid tackle. Obviously, Joe Alt, great tackle. Even Bradley Bozeman is a fine center, but I think you have to try to improve the guard position if you're the Chargers. Going into the offseason, I think the defense also crumbled a little bit, and that was pretty common between many of the wild card teams, especially the losers. But now we'll go ahead and move on to the NFC teams here. If you've been enjoying this video, go ahead and like and comment. Let me know what you guys have thought so far. Let's get back to it. Look, guys, the Vikings, they had some costly turnovers that felt like it kind of killed their game. And really, they kind of just let the Rams ram it down their throat. No Diddy or anything. But the O-line felt like it struggled a bit too. And if we're being honest here, I think the Vikings have a bit of thinking to do in the offseason. They have a real nice platform to build off of, but just the turnovers, the fumbles, especially in this game, a couple interceptions from Darnold, which came a little bit later because started trying to, just, you gotta get something going. But at the same time, it felt like Kevin O'Connell, he didn't really, adjust throughout this game. And that's definitely something you want to look at. I'd say the Vikings got out coached here, if we're being 100% honest. Now, Sam Darnold, he had an all right game. But at the same time, I think it kind of shows that Darnold isn't quite going to be a team's franchise quarterback. Now, I'm not going to completely write him off. But at the same time, I think if you truly want to go out there and get your guy, I think you try to get your guy, maybe not Sam Darnold. Now, I will say, I think that he will 100% get tagged. I don't see a reason for the Vikings not to. And a lot of people are saying he's gone from a $40 million quarterback to a $10 million quarterback. But that's what he signed for before this season started. So if I'm being honest, I think, Sam Darnold might still get a solid little paycheck there for whatever team he goes to. And if I'm the Vikings, though, I think you do consider tagging him and letting him play next year, even with J.J. McCarthy, who's most likely going to be ready to take over. I'd say you wait till about halfway through next year. But if we're talking about how Darnold played, he did hold on to the ball a bit. And kind of like Joe Burrow, that's a little bit part of his play style with trying to find the big play and everything. But you could really tell, right? Another fumble there. His turnovers were pretty bad. And not all of them came later. I did check that. But it's just part of his play style to hold the ball, try to find the big play. But they couldn't find the big play. And if anything, he looked gun shy. Now, some of this was from pretty good coverage that the Rams were putting out there. They were really stopping the Vikings from getting too much going, and I think that's just what contributed so much to what was a bit of a blowout from the Vikings standpoint. But we'll go ahead and move on next here. Look, guys, moving on to what's the youngest team in the playoffs this year. They have a lot of room for growth, and I wasn't sure why people were picking the Packers in this game. I don't quite think they were the favorites, but I feel like I'd look everywhere and there'd just be people picking the Packers a bit more than you'd honestly expect. So I didn't really get it. If I'm being honest, I did take the Eagles. I thought they were the better team, and they really showed that out there. Now, I'm not quite ready to sit here and call Jordan Love a fraud or anything. He is still pretty inexperienced. This is literally his second year starting in the NFL. And even though he sat, it's been a pretty good 2 years, right? Like, from what people expected, it's been better. I think you do expect more from them. Now, they did have some players out this game. They were missing Elton Jenkins, who went down during the game, and Christian Watson got hurt last week, and he did miss the game. So that's something to consider for the Packers. If they have those players, do I think they win this game? Honestly, not really, but I think that is something just to keep in mind here. They already don't have like the greatest receiver room. Obviously, they've Romeo Dobbs and then they also have Christian Watson, like I said, missed the game. Then they also do have Jaden Reed. Now, it feels like this team, kind of like the Steelers, except their receivers slightly better. It's like they have three wide receiver twos, if I'm being honest. And they're really hoping one of them can truly break out here and become a receiver one in the league. But I think they could probably use a truly elite receiver. And it wouldn't surprise me if they went out there and try to get Garrett Wilson. Obviously, a lot of people are thinking he'll be moved. And I'd say I really like the Packers to go out and get him. Obviously, they did trade Devontae a couple years ago, and they didn't win that Super Bowl when Devontae Adams was on the roster. And I know I said earlier, how much does a good, great wide receiver turn you into a contender about the Steelers? But I think that it's slightly different here for the Packers, and I'd say that an elite receiver like Garrett Wilson, I'd say Garrett Wilson is definitely better than Pickens. I would say that that turns them into a bit of a better team and would help them contend. Maybe they could even trade for Pickens. He's not as good as Garrett Wilson, obviously. And I'd say that it doesn't quite solve the issue. But that's it on the Packers. They're still inexperienced. They're the youngest team. Give them a bit more time. I'd expect them to be to the Super Bowl in 3 years or so, or at least really close. All right, guys, we're finally getting done with this video here. We have one more team to talk about, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure where they go from here. Like, It's just, it feels like they have a solid foundation. They can definitely go up from here for sure. They do have the resources, a pretty young core for the most part, except their receivers aging a little bit between Godwin and Mike Evans. And Mayfield is obviously a good quarterback. He was probably top 5 in the league this year, if we're being honest. And they do have fine draft capital. Now, Bucky Irving's looking like he can be a top 5 back in the league. But talking about Todd Bowles here, do we think if you can immediately upgrade, do you think about moving on from Todd Bowles? Now, I'm not sure that Mike McCarthy would quite be an immediate upgrade, so I don't think they'd move on from him this year. And I definitely say he'd be back next year, but I think we should start considering that he may be on the hot seat and there might be a bit of pressure on him. Now, I wouldn't worry about Baker personally, though. He played great. He really went out there. He was running people over too, which was really cool to see. I mean, he went out there and it felt like he was running as hard as a fullback does in general, but I think that the defense this game, though, did bend a little too much. Sometimes the offense stalled out, but that's to be expected. And this Commanders offense is good, but I think the defense for the Buccaneers definitely needs to do better. It felt like the Commanders were going in the middle of the field a bit, and the middle of the field was open. I wouldn't expect a team like the Buccaneers to be leaving the middle of the field open. It feels like they're normally pretty good in coverage from the linebacker core even into the secondary there. So I think that you have to improve your secondary a little bit. Obviously, they did have a couple players leave them. And Carlton Davis did leave them and become a Lion this year. But if I'm being honest, I think that this team definitely has a good room to grow. And I think that they're either going to get stuck a little bit in mediocrity from here, or if they can make sure that they're making the right decisions, being careful about stuff, but still making a couple risks on this roster, I think you could see them improving and becoming a true top contender in the NFC through the next couple years. Now look guys, that's it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Make sure to comment any of your thoughts below. Subscribe, especially if you made it all the way through this long of a video, and leave a like below. Thank you all.